Beowulf, King Arthur, Robin Hood. These mythical warriors were the superheroes of their day. They fought evil and injustice and inspired the cultural makeup of Great Britain. The tradition of British superheroes continued well into the 20th century, where one British comic book superhero flew above the rest. While American children were enjoying the golden age of comics, British children were living in a dark age, not just in comics, in life. The Nazi blitzkrieg rained bombs down on England. Fathers left families to fight around the globe, and Britain itself prepared for an invasion. It didn't start off that way. In 1939, British children got exposed to reprints of American superheroes, Superman in particular. A British comic tabloid, The Triumph, began reprinting The Man of Steel. Superman was a sensation, like in America. Unfortunately, world events would make his popularity in Great Britain short-lived. The Nazi invasion of Norway cut England off from its source of paper. Paper was essential for the war effort. Non-essential paper use was dramatically cut back. It didn't totally stop British comics. Publishers scrounged for paper and ink, and they used whatever they could get their hands on. This gave British war-era comics a very distinct look. The color of ink and the type of paper used would change from page to page, and sometimes even repurposed cardboard would be used. There was no size or page count format, and some comics had page counts as low as 2 pages. With the war's end, all this changed. British comics made a comeback. As a move to boost the British post-war economy, American comics and pulp magazines were not allowed to be directly imported into England. To get around this, American publishers had to sell reprint rights to British publishers. One American publisher who took advantage of this was Fawcett Publishing. The entire Fawcett line was shopped and sold to various British publishers. The publishing line of L.Miller and Son purchased the rights to Fawcett's hottest character, Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel would also become L.Miller and Son's bestseller. Captain Marvel and the rest of the Marvel family gave British children thrills and spills just like they did for American kids. However, the action would come to an end in 1953. In the States, DC Comics was in a legal tug-of-war with Fawcett over copyright infringement. DC felt that Fawcett's Captain Marvel was a blatant copy of Superman. The battle ended when Fawcett decided to get out of the comic book business. They suspended operations, and no more Captain Marvel material was available for L.Miller and Son to reprint. Publisher L.Miller approached writer-artist Mick Anglo to create a new superhero. But not just a new superhero. He wanted a British superhero. And using Captain Marvel as a blueprint, Anglo created Marvelman. The secret origin of Marvelman begins when an eccentric astrophysicist named Guntog Barghelt discovers a secret universal power. He searches for a worthy person to bestow this great power on, and an honest young man named Mickey Moran passes Barghelt's test. He hooks Moran up to an atomic machine of his design. It gives Moran special powers of the atom, and with the magic word Komoda, Moran now has the ability to transform into the super powerful Marvelman. Anglo's first stories were touched-up Captain Marvel stories, with Marvelman being added in over top of the panels. Later, Captain Marvel stories were rewritten and redrawn, and eventually Anglo evolved to all original stories. In the meantime, Captain Marvel's villains were also changed. Savannah became Dr. Gargunza, and Captain Nazi and Black Adam were combined into Young Nasty Man. Another aspect of the Captain Marvel storyline that needed to be changed was his family. In his adventures, Captain Marvel was often joined by his sister Mary Marvel and teenage friend Captain Marvel Jr. Anglo replaced them with Young Marvelman and Kid Marvelman. The British comic book publishers were doing fine, that is until 1959. That year, Great Britain allowed the direct importing of American comics. Marvelman's weekly black and white comic was now competing against full-color issues of Superman and Batman. This wave of American comics took a toll on the sales of British-born titles. L.Miller tried to cut cost of publication by reprinting stories, and this may have led to some tension between Mick Anglo and the publisher. In 1960, the disgruntled artist-writer would strike off on his own and begin his own comic line, Anglo Features. Like he had done before with Captain Marvel, Anglo took some of his old Marvelman stories and touched them up by replacing Marvelman with his new hero. This time, young reporter Johnny D would say the magic words El Kareem to turn into the amazing Captain Miracle. Unfortunately, this title would only last about a year. Marvelman and his two sidekicks would continue to be published weekly by L.Miller & Son until 1963. That year, L.Miller filed for bankruptcy, and they struggled on and attempted to re-spark their line by reprinting horror comics from the U.S. This move did not save them. They discontinued their comic line in 1966. A year later, Mick Anglo would take another stab at a superhero. With the same modus operandi as before, he retouched old Marvelman stories, this time by adding a helmet and a cape. In this incarnation, ace reporter Johnny Chapman says the magic word Sundisk to turn into the ever-incredible Miracleman. Like his previous go with Captain Miracle, it failed. But oddly enough, this character gained a degree of popularity when it was translated into Spanish and Portuguese and sold under the name Super Hombre. Slingshot to the 1980s. Des Skin, the editorial director of Marvel UK, decided to strike out on his own. He formed Quality Communications. Before working at Marvel UK, Skin had published a comic fanzine called Warrior. He decided to revive the title as a superhero sci-fi anthology series. With the popularity of Doctor Who and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, England was in the midst of a sci-fi boom. Warrior would focus heavily on sci-fi, but with a darker edge. Skin wanted a superhero to fill out this title, and he debated between creating a new character or reviving an old one. Eventually, he decided to revive Marvelman because a small number of British fans still cared for him, and he thought they would welcome a revival. Skin went to publisher L.Miller to gain the rights to Marvelman. Next, he asked former co-workers about working on the revival. He was turned down twice. Writer Stephen Moore brought to his attention that a mutual friend of theirs, writer Alan Moore, had mentioned in a fanzine that he wanted to revive the character. As Steve Moore put it, Alan would give his eye and teeth to work on Marvelman. Being a little skittish on the idea, Skin offered Alan Moore the chance to write a single Marvelman story. It turned out that the story and concept was so impressive, Skin offered Moore the series. Moore's take on Marvelman was dark and gritty, a total contrast from the light-hearted Golden Age adventures. Gary Leach was chosen to take on the art direction. He used the facial features of actor Paul Newman to model Marvelman's look. Together, Moore and Leach made one of the greatest superhero relaunches of all time. The new Marvelman adventures begins with reporter Michael Moran. He is married. He lives an ordinary life, with the exception that at night, in his sleep, he has dreams of flying, and this dream usually ends in a nightmare. While on his job as a reporter, he gets caught up in a terrorist raid at a nuclear power plant. During the action, he sees the word atomic spelled backwards, and it triggers him into saying the backwards word, Komoda. With a flash, Marvelman returns. Moran had no memory of being Marvelman until that point. He now remembers that he and his two sidekicks were caught up in a nuclear explosion in outer space. Later, Marvelman discovers that Kid Marvelman survived the explosion as well. Johnny Bates, who was Kid Marvelman, is now grown up and has become a rich and powerful businessman. He's also become a psychopath. The two face off in a brutal battle. Kid Marvelman accidentally says the magic word and reverts back to the young child version of himself. As a young Johnny Bates, he is innocent of his alter ego's actions, but he's fully aware of the evil he has done. Mentally, he closes down and goes into a catatonic state. This dark take on Marvelman was perfect for the 1980s. It drew the attention of American comic book publisher Eclipse Comics. They acquired the publishing rights from Des Skin and announced a Marvelman comic book in the works for American readers. That is, until Marvel Comics found out. Marvel didn't like the idea of another publisher using the word Marvel. They filed an injunction to stop them. Eclipse complied and changed Marvelman's name to Miracleman, and this was sort of a nod of sorts to Mick Anglo's other character. In 1985, Eclipse finally released a Miracleman comic book. They reprinted and colorized Warrior's black and white stories. American readers got a taste of Alan Moore's writing, and Moore's dark story would be hailed around comic fandom as brilliant. Moore would helm the writing until issue 16, and with issue 17, Moore turned over the writing duties to his friend, Neil Gaiman. Eclipse Comics was one of the leaders in what was called the direct sales market. Eclipse wasn't available at your typical grocery store spinner rack. Their titles were purchased directly from the publisher or distributor, which meant that they could be found at your local comic book shop. These direct sales books had the advantage of not being censored under the Comics Code Authority, but they were at a huge distribution disadvantage. Eclipse had many interesting titles, but after 16 years in the business, they couldn't make a go of it any longer. Eclipse Comics filed for bankruptcy. Their assets came up for sale and were purchased by comic fandom favorite Todd McFarlane. Thinking that he had all of the Eclipse properties, McFarlane announced a new Miracleman title was in the works. He even produced a Miracleman statue. But then, things turned nasty. Writers Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman had been promised part ownership of the character by Des Skin. They were given this because they had invented new storylines and secondary characters that now made up the canon of the character. They sued McFarlane for their part in Miracleman. A very nasty public war of words broke out between McFarlane and Neil Gaiman. Funny thing about lawsuits, sometimes they don't go as anyone expects. The judge ruling on the Miracleman case took a close look at Marvelman's early back issues, and he discovered that when Marvelman was originally published in 1953, publisher L.Miller and Son had printed the copyright and trademark in Mick Anglo's name. This meant that Marvelman was not L.Miller's character to give to Des Skin, so Des Skin could not have given part ownership to writers Moore and Gaiman, or could not have sold the rights to Eclipse Comics, who in return could not have sold the character to Todd McFarlane. So, to get to the chase, Marvelman belonged to his creator, Mick Anglo. The ruling caught all the participants off guard. Alan Moore released a statement saying that he was actually happy over the decision. An elderly Mick Anglo and his wife formed what is called a limited liability company with some people from the entertainment industry, and they began shopping Miracleman to comic book publishers and film studios. At the 2009 New York Comic Con, it was announced that Miracleman had become part of the Marvel Universe. The first Miracleman graphic novels came out under the Marvel banner in 2010. They featured Mick Anglo reprints from the 1950s and 60s and recolorized stories from Moore and Gaiman's Warrior run. Writer Alan Moore felt that with the Warrior run, he had unfairly profited from Miracleman without proper permission from the rightful owner. On these Marvel reprints, he had his name removed and had the writing credit to read the original writer. Beowulf, King Arthur, Robin Hood. Like the sagas of British warriors of old, the epic of Miracleman will go on. And with the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, who knows what future is in store for Britain's most beloved superhero. Hi everybody, this is Darren, aka FizzFop, and I just want to say thank you for watching Lost Hero of the Golden Age. Thank you for watching this Marvelman episode. When I did the thank you video last year, there was so much enthusiasm for Marvelman, it sort of caught me off guard because I showed a list of about 20 characters that I was thinking about doing videos on and wanted to see what the viewers were interested in seeing. And Marvelman, who wasn't even on the list, came in third. And the people I talked to back and forth about Marvelman were just so enthused about the character that I said I got to do this episode. So here you go. Hope you enjoyed it. So coming up next, I got a Bronze Age story, which I hope everybody will enjoy. If you really dig the 1970s, then I hope you're going to dig this. And I don't have any catchphrase or anything like that, so I'm just going to say bye. Maybe I need to work on that. I should come up with something. See ya.